Okay.
Yeah, I can't see me either. Probably best.
I was going to say, sometimes you're distracted.
As people are joining us,
Yeah.
good morning to everyone who's coming in. And please tell us in the chat where you're coming from. I am in beautiful Central Ohio, Columbus, and it looks like a beautiful day today. The sun is out. It's going to be gorgeous, except for the fact that we have air quality alerts going. And so it's probably kind of hazy out there. I can't completely tell from my window here, but it's probably kind of hazy. So we decided to do this meetup earlier today because we know most of you are on summer break, which is wonderful. And my thinking was, well, maybe you would tune in to the meetup, before you take the kids to the pool or go to the library or whatever kind of fun thing you have planned for today. So we will be starting right at 9:30, which is about 4 minutes from now. But let us know where you're from. And just go ahead and put it in the chat. Circleville in Southeast Ohio.
There he is.
Columbus and Marietta, yay. And I did have emails from people, expressing that they wouldn't be able to attend, but hoping we would be recording it. We will be recording when we get started. And another Columbus. So please put in the chat where you are coming from. We don't seem to have anyone from Northern Ohio yet, anyway. All right, Lebanon. The one thing I'm really been happy about with the meetups is that we do get to reach people all over the state of Ohio and sometimes even from out of state. That's been a really positive thing about this, even though if you watch, that I've had probably every kind of technology glitch that can happen has happened during the meetups. So I guess the good news is, I've learned how to fix some of them. And so it's kind of, it's been a learning experience along the way. I'm super excited about this topic today, about OTs and SLPs collaborating and working together. My own experience as a practicing speech pathologist in the schools was that I was working with some students that had very complicated needs, and they were in pretty much a self-contained type of classroom for students that were identified with multiple disabilities. And the intervention specialist, was working to get them more integrated into regular classrooms, but for the most part, they were self-contained in this room. And she liked for me to come and do my speech language therapy in the classroom. She felt like that was that helped her know how to carry on some of the things I was doing. And I liked it because, as we know, in speech language, context is everything. And having that, it helped with transference to, to be in the context that the students were in. And the occupational therapist was also working in the classroom. And I know we kind of looked at, I would look over sometimes. I've always been fascinated with the work that OTs do. And she'd be watching me. And so, we just kind of organically started working together. with the same child at the same time. And, it certainly helped with those verbalizations to have the motor things going on at the same time. And we really found this to be, we didn't know what we were doing. We were just sort of experimenting, and but we were really happy with the results we were getting. And so I'm really excited to have DeeAnna here today because she has done the research to show that this really is the way to do it in a very effective type of therapy. So as you can see, her presentation is up. A transdisciplinary approach to the occupational therapist and speech language pathologist collaboration. And one thing, speaking of collaboration, Brenda George, who is on this call, has facilitated and put together a community of practice of related service providers. And you may be very familiar with this group, the Ohio Related Services Personnel Network. Did I get that right, Brenda? I think. Okay. And you may have attended some of the professional developments, and the Office for Exceptional Children has collaborated with Brenda and worked in these professional developments. Last school year, Joe Petrarca and I joined Brenda in many of these professional developments. They're regionally located. They are in person. And this year, Sarah Boney, the assistant director of our diverse learners team, will be joining Brenda, and I will be as well. So we're really looking forward to that. And at the very end, Brenda's going to make an announcement about these regional workshops and where we're going to be going, where Brenda and I have been planning, and we're super excited about it. But without further ado, I am going to ask everyone to please turn their cameras off. And if you would mute yourselves, that would be great. Thank you for that. And Brenda and I will be turning my camera off too. We are going to have the chat open. So if you have questions, please put your question in the chat. And we will answer the questions at the end of DeeAnna's presentation. So she has a lot of content to get through, and we definitely want to hear all of it. So put your questions in the chat. We will get to it at the end. And then at the end also, you may want to, unmute and just ask your question out. So without further ado, I am going to turn you over to DeeAnna, and she can introduce herself and get started. Welcome, DeeAnna.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Yep, I'm DeeAnna ConleyStemple, and I'm currently getting my getting my doctorate. So this is my capstone project that I wanted to present. The title of it, just to reiterate, a transdisciplinary approach to the occupational therapist and speech language pathologist collaboration. I affectionately call it SPOT group. To give you some background about myself, I have 22 plus years of experience now. I'm currently finishing up the doctorate, and I will be graduating in August, so that's wonderful. I have worked with all grade levels through preschool all the way through post-secondary, and most of my experience, most of the years I've experienced working with children with multiple disabilities. I have been both level 1 and level 2 fieldwork educators, and I have co-created and co-taught professional development experiences for teachers and staff. I think that was misrepresented in my bio, and I just wanted to make sure I set that straight. As far as the learning objectives for today, I hope when we are finished today that you can describe the differences between a multidisciplinary approach, an interdisciplinary approach, and a transdisciplinary approach to collaboration. I want you to be able to understand the importance of that collaboration between OT and speech therapy and then in the school setting. And I hope it's okay. I say speech therapy a lot. I mean speech language pathologists. I hope they're interchangeable. I am hoping that by the end of today that you can demonstrate an understanding by expressing the steps that you would take to plan a SPOT group. And I want you to be able to illustrate how you would execute that SPOT group, including at least 2 ways to differentiate student participation. Okay, so the literature review. I won't go real far into it. I have to move my little camera here so I can see I hope everybody can see my diagram that I made. But in order to do the literature review, you have to start with keywords. So the keywords that I used to find the research that ended up being pertinent for the project, I used occupational therapy and therapist. I used speech language pathologist and speech language pathology, speech therapist. I used those in conjunction with collaboration. I used multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and transdisciplinary approaches. I just looked at collaboration in general. And then I went into like the scopes of practice of each field. I am going to dig into some of the definitions because I feel like some of the definitions in the research is kind of ambiguous. So I want to make sure that you have a good understanding of what the definitions look like. And then I want to look at or think about the scopes of practice because occupational therapy and speech language pathology scope of practices, they align theoretically beautifully, but they overlap practically a lot. And so, especially in the school environment. So I created this chart off to the right. And if you look in the middle of the chart, it looks at the foundational skills. So following directions, attention to task, sharing, taking turns, listening with intention. Those are things that we're all working on. We all need those skills in order to build from that. But it's not just OTs and speech therapists. It's the intervention specialists. It's the general education teachers. It's the related arts teachers. It's the parapros in the classroom. We're all working on those skills. If we drop down to the bottom of that, some of the skills that OT kind of takes on their own would be that fine motor control, that strength, visual motor, bilateral coordination, the sensory integration stuff. Now, the speech therapists, they usually handle the articulation, the fluency, language development, social skill development, reasoning, summarizing, stuttering. They usually kind of handle that. But if you look in the middle, again, we overlap when it comes to executive functioning, switch in AAC use, we overlap with feeding, and we overlap with self-advocacy. Again, there's just lots to it. But then if you go from where it says OT and speech and kind of go up, that's where we start overlapping with the teachers. That's where we start like really trying to make it impactful for the school environment. So for OT, that looks like letter formation, number formation, word placement, spacing, vocational skills a lot of the time. Obviously, we do a lot more than this stuff. These are just examples. For speech language pathology, a lot of times they're working on that vocabulary or sequencing events, word identification, and phonological awareness. But all of it has to come up to that top and get to those academic skills, because in the schools we have to access that curriculum. So we're looking at math competition, literature or literacy, and written communication. So if we think about that and then kind of go back down, you see how we are overlapping, and just really we need to help each other out because our skills are so, our scopes of practice are so overlapping. Okay, so let's dig into some of these definitions. So multidisciplinary. That means that you are maintaining your disciplinary boundaries when you're working with somebody else. So you're not sharing goals and objectives or strategies. And the best way that I could think to explain that would be when I used to do speech, or I would do preschool evaluations with the speech therapist. And we would what we called tag team. And so we were in there together. We're working side by side each other, but we were taking turns working with the student. So I would kind of engage with the student, get the student to do, X, Y, and Z. When the student would start to like lose attention or need, just want to do something else, then the speech therapist might swoop in with this fun activity and start trying to get some of the information that they need for their evaluation. So I would kind of take a step back, jot down what I need, figure out what my next step is, and then wait for when that therapist sees an opportunity for them to step away. So we kind of just tag teamed, okay? So we're working together, but side by side. Interdisciplinary is where you're starting to blend those disciplinary boundaries. So goals and objectives are shared. Strategies are really not. You're kind of still staying in your own lane for that. I think this is where most of us do co-treat. This is where most of us do collaborate, is in that interdisciplinary approach. And it's very good. What we want, though, is we want to get to that transdisciplinary area. So within transdisciplinary, we have the role release. Goals and objectives are shared. Strategies are shared. Everybody's working together. Everybody's working toward the same goals. Okay, so let's talk about service delivery, because that's always a big topic anyway in our field. So the more traditional models pull out and push in. There are some positives and some negatives to that. So positives would be, it's a little bit more flexible. And I would say that scheduling is probably a little bit easier. Scheduling is never easy in school-based therapy, but I would say it might be a little bit easier than trying to schedule transdisciplinary teams approaches. I would say the negative side to that is a lot of times you're working as an island. You're working all alone. You don't have that person to bounce off of to share that load. And it is impactful over time. When we're looking at the transdisciplinary approach, it's the whole group model, or it might be subgroups of the whole group, but it's more of that group model. And the positives are that it lightens your load. I mean, immediately you have somebody to bounce off of. You have somebody that you're learning from. You're learning strategies. You watch them do that, and you're like, oh, I never thought about doing it that way. I can do that, and I could still get what I need by doing that. You can problem solve together. Some of our cases can be very tough. And so you just need to, sometimes talk it out with somebody and then, problem solve it together. I would say the negatives, I wouldn't say there's real negatives, but as far as a negative, when you're thinking about that transdisciplinary approach, is it's not instantaneous. It takes work. It does take a lot of planning. And for those involved, you have to be flexible. You have to have rapport, and you have to be open and trusting of the process and of each other. You really have to kind of put yourself out there. You can have all the things that make up that transdisciplinary approach and not reach it for whatever reason. Like, for example, I have done spot groups with very, very good friends that we know each other so well, and it did not get to that point. But then I've done spot groups with people that I don't know as well, and for whatever reason, we make that connection. It's like our energies match, and then all of a sudden it becomes this beautiful thing, and we're like of the same mindset. There's like hardly any verbal communication that even needs to happen, because we just look at each other across the room. She'll kind of do this, and I'm like, oh, okay, and I know exactly what she needs me to do. It's a wonderful thing when it does work, and we just always should try to strive to get there. But as individual therapists, you definitely need to weigh the pros and cons of what you're trying to accomplish with your student, and then decide what's best for you guys. Collaboration prerequisites, call them professional competencies, if you will. So as far as the individual competencies, you need to be confident in your own skills. You need to be able to feel like you can fulfill the role that is expected on your team. The common competencies are those overlapping areas of competency. So, or the overlapping areas. So if you are working with your partner and you are struggling with those overlapping areas, it can either be a collaboration at that point, or it can be a source of tension. So that's kind of up to you at that point as a professional. And then the collaborative is how well do you work on that team? And not really as far as even collaborating, but like think about like when you're in an ETR, you're sitting around that table, it's a collaborative document. But how are you working on that team in that way? When we think about the personal competence that you need to have, you need to be confident in your own skills and confident in your partner. You need to be flexible. You need to be respectful. It seems silly, but you need to be respectful of others. Ability to resolve conflict and ability to negotiate. Sometimes it's not about OT. Sometimes it's not, and like the fine motor needs to take a back seat to the sensory motor, or the sensory motor needs to take a back seat to, positioning and things like that. So we need to be willing to be flexible and know that we'll get our time to shine. But we first need to understand the roles of the possible collaborators, and then we might be able to get to that transdisciplinary collaboration. How do we get there? Through interprofessional education. So the World Health Organization explained it as the experience that occurs when students learn from, about, and with each other. So I will say that when I was in OT school, this wasn't a thing. OTs and PTs, we learned alongside each other, and we were in constant competition with one another. And I don't really know why that happened, or why we continued to do that, since we were already in our own program. So we had already kind of made our choice. There was a study that came out of Edith Cowan University in Australia, and they did a study with pre-professional OT students and speech language pathology students, and they had them, I think they broke them into groups, and they had a case that they went through the whole semester. And so what at the end of that came out, they concluded that the pre-professional students said they had a better understanding of other disciplines, better understanding of what their role was on the team, and they came out of that experience feeling more confident in their own skills. That is what we would only hope for any of our students that are graduating. I think about, like, when I came out as a new grad, I didn't know what physical therapy was going to do on that team because I never took the time to learn about their field. So in the school environment, I didn't know how that differentiated, or what the speech therapist was going to tackle versus what the intervention specialist was going to tackle. And so I just feel like there are a lot of schools right now that are trying to start this. I know Ohio State has started a really great program and really diving into like 7 or I think it was 9 different colleges and getting different majors to talk to one another and really start to learn about each other. Because no matter, I mean, I personally can't think of a field of OT where I would work that I would only be an island and you would never have any contact with anybody else, as far as has to be a doctor on the team, or there has to be a speech therapist somewhere, or a physical therapist, or a teacher. There are always other team members. I want to dig into that needs assessment. So I sent the needs assessment out in, I think it was April, and I had 137 people that responded, which I was super excited about. The targeted stakeholders were OTs and speech therapists, and then we had some administrators that did participate. So of the total, 67.2% of respondents were speech language pathologists, 28.5% were occupational therapists, and then 4.3% made up those extra. There was an OT assistant and then some administrators and a superintendent in there. And there were also some therapists that weren't practicing in schools, which is absolutely fine. I was very happy to get the input. When we asked them about their districts allowing them time to collaborate, 73% reported being encouraged to collaborate as needed. 10.2% reported being provided consistent opportunities to collaborate at least one time per trimester or quarter. And then 5.1% reported being provided opportunities to collaborate at least one time per semester. So let's jump back up to that 73%. That means that we are being encouraged to collaborate, but we're not being provided the specific time to collaborate. And time in a school is very valuable. So that does make it tough. Of the 15% that is allowed, like they're providing specific time, that's wonderful. I'm so glad that 15% of the reported school districts are providing that time. But we're being provided one time per trimester or quarter and one time per semester. And then you think about caseloads. And you think an average OT caseload is probably between 40 and 50 for school age. And then you think about, for a speech therapist, between 50 and 80 probably for school age too. And then you think that a lot of times OTs and speech therapists, there are multiples that are working together. And they're only going to be provided one time per trimester, quarter, or semester. How are they going to prioritize the case that they're going to talk about? And then how are they going to be able to really dig in and problem solve as much as they need to do that? So that's something that really needs to be considered. So when we talked about the actual level of collaboration that when they were collaborating that they could achieve, 36.5% reported that multidisciplinary collaboration where they're kind of working alongside each other. 40.1% reported interdisciplinary, and then 11.7% reported being able to get to that transdisciplinary collaboration, which is what we want to get to. I think it's amazing that 40.1% reported interdisciplinary collaboration when they're getting such little built-in planning time or that collaboration time. So I think that's wonderful, and it says a lot about the OTs and speech therapists in our districts in the state of Ohio, that they're going above and beyond to really make those collaborative efforts. Oh, the comments. The comments were very interesting. And they varied very widely. Some of them that I put in here, one person wrote that typed in that they collaborated, occurred daily, if not hourly. I would say I'm lucky enough that I do collaborate at least daily. And if I see her in the building, or if we're in the same building, then it probably is closer to hourly. But I don't, based on the other information, I don't know that is a typical thing. I will say that this past year I worked with 4 different speech therapists, but I still had pretty good relationships with all of them. 2 of them I was very close with, and we collaborated a ton. Speech therapy and OT were never encouraged to collaborate by the administration. I think that's incredibly sad. I'm sorry, they just started mowing out. Of course. I hope you can still hear me okay. Somebody reported not knowing any district providing time for collaboration. I think this is a really sad outlook to think that none of the districts in the state of Ohio would offer that time specifically. I'm glad to know that this particular person is wrong and that there are districts out there that are providing that time. Somebody reported difficulty of collaborating with therapists because of being in different buildings and even different districts at times. This is definitely a logical explanation or, reason as a barrier. And then somebody said collaboration occurs if we pass each other in the hall for 10 seconds. Again, I've also had that. I know this past school year, the physical therapist I work with, we only saw each other on Fridays, and it was always in passing because it was a very busy day. We still did make that time, and we still did communicate in other ways through a lot of texting and email, just because that was really important to us. Okay, so let's dig into those limitations and barriers to collaboration. Professionally, if you're not confident in your own skills or the skills of your partner, that's going to be a huge barrier to collaboration. Logistics, again, when you're in different buildings or you only see each other once a week or maybe even less than that, that's definitely an issue. And then those scopes of practice. How hard line are you, how hard of a line are you making for those scopes of practice? And I don't want you to think that I'm asking anybody to break any rules. I'm not asking you to do that. But there are definitely areas that blend, and we can be working together and still looking at things from different perspectives. When we look at organizationally, this is where, that administration comes in and it's so important. So some of the things that were mentioned were lack of time, and that usually correlated with caseload. And so when the caseload numbers are higher, then we have less time to collaborate. And then lack of encouragement, or somebody reported even being prohibited from co-treating, which incredibly just, I can believe it. So I really hope that this, and maybe in the future, we can start highlighting some of this for administrators to know that it is okay. The last area I wanted to touch on is billing concerns. That was a big one, and it was mentioned several times. So I reached out to Mark Smith he's the program coordinator for the Medicaid in Schools program. And he reiterated that it is allowed. We are definitely allowed to co-treat, and we are allowed to bill for those services as long as we're working towards IEP goals. We are qualified practitioners, so as long as we have current licensures, and then the students are making progress. So as long as those three things are there, we can definitely bill for those services. So I think that we definitely need to think about that when we're planning for starting out the school year. And then Mark he wrote in there that he was happy to see that like the national organizations, they definitely are putting out there that co-treating is it's a best practice, and we need to think about that. And so even Mark Smith reiterated that, and I thought that was wonderful. Okay, so the purpose of SPOT Group. As school-based OTs and speech therapists, we want what's best for our students. We want the most effective, least restrictive means to deliver those services. The SPOT Group is going to provide the structured framework for that transdisciplinary collaboration between the OTs and speech language pathologists in the school setting. So in order to get to that transdisciplinary approach, that level, we need to be grounded in theory. And then we need to achieve that role release, that effective communication, and the extensive planning. I did not pull any frames of reference from the speech language pathology area because I don't know those. So this is very OT oriented. But the model of human occupation is a frame of reference that occupational therapists use a lot. And so the parts of that are volition, habituation, and performance capacity. So we're looking at, are the students motivated? Are they engaged in this activity? Is it meaningful? Does it impact their routines or the behaviors or the things that they need to do in their day? Are they able to access this event? And what's hindering them if they are? Do we need to adapt the environment? What is happening? What supports do they need? Another model that we might look at is the person, environment, occupation model. Within that one, we look at intrinsic factors and extrinsic factors. So we might look at the student's overall health, their cognitive abilities. We might look at, as far as extrinsic, we might look at the environment and culturally, what supports do they have. And then that factors into the occupational performance and then the participation. So let's dig into this whole idea of role release. Role release requires confidence in one's own abilities and understanding of your partner's role. So Martin and his colleagues, they wrote that school-based therapists need to embrace overlapping skills by blurring professional boundaries and working together toward their common goals of patient-student outcomes. McMurtry wrote, although occupational therapists and speech language pathologists can observe the same behavior, they do not necessarily see the same thing. So if you're co-training and you're working together, you know, we're doing the same activity, but I'm looking at it through my OT eyes that, you know, with all of my educational background and all of my experiences, and my partner's looking at it from a totally different perspective. But we're looking at the same thing and we're getting completely different information. That only helps to elevate the student's performance and our ability when we're working with that student. There's another quote. Hebert went on to say that he was trying to reinforce the need for this collaboration, and he said that a child's early communication and play are two childhood occupations. And so, you know, again, we're overlapping so much that we need to just come together and work together. And I want you to remember too that role release is not meant to replace individual professions, not at all. We're not wanting anybody to break any rules here. We just want to come together and we want to elevate each other's abilities and the overall outcomes. All right, so let's dig into how do we plan the spot group. It takes tons of communication, and I listed a ton of different ways there. We do a lot of texting. We do a lot of, you know, jump on a Google Meet for, you know, while we're eating lunch and we kind of talk about it. The speech therapist I worked with last year, on the day that she was at our school, we were always in passing because she would have students and I would have students. She's pushing in and I'm pushing in and everything. So we would use her table. We would lay out materials, and then I might go in around the chalkboard or the whiteboard. I like A, B, let's not do C, and I'll tweak D. And then she'll come in and say, okay, but I want to do B first, and then we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And so, you know, eventually you figure out your way to work together and how that communication looks. And, you know, again, I trusted her completely, and I think she trusted me completely, and that's why it worked. Logistics. You got to plan. I mean, the more planning you can do, the better it's going to turn out. So who's going to do what when? How are we going to get materials out to students? Where do we want the students sitting or positioned? So, you know, are we going to be sitting on the carpet first? And do we want the student to be in his wheelchair, or do we want him to be down on the floor with his peers? Do we want him sitting in a beanbag chair? Do we want him sitting on a bench? Do we want the students to start at their desks and then move to the carpet? Or are we not going to do the carpet at all today? You know, like these are all things we need to do. And then if we are going to ask the students to move from one area of the room to another area of the room, how are we transitioning them, and then what supports we're going to give them during and after that transition? It matters very much where students are going to sit and who they're sitting with, because we want to direct those peer interactions. And then we want to think about, like I was saying, like who's doing what. The speech therapist doesn't have to be the one to read the book. I've read plenty of books to students, but we do have to plan who is going to do what when. And then differentiation. From the beginning, you need to think about the differentiation and how you're going to grade materials, because we have a wide range of ability within all of our classrooms. And then how are we going to reach all of the students? And then if that includes assistive technology and adaptive equipment, how are we going to bring that in? So more planning, the setting. The classroom is going to be the most natural setting for our students. That's where we're going to get the best occupational performance, most likely. In that classroom, the desks should be at the proper height already. Their materials should be there. They know the rules of the classroom for the most part, and it cuts down on the transition. I have definitely done spot groups in therapy rooms, cafeterias, gym. We've done plenty of them outside, especially like during COVID. We went outside a lot during that time. I've done spot groups in hallways. It just depends on your level of comfort and the students that you're working with. Supplies. I mean, I use, our therapy department is, we've been able to purchase quite a few of those things that we need, like, construction paper, glue, all that stuff. So we usually have a good supply of that. I use a lot of Google, Teachers Pay Teachers, Tools to Grow, Pinterest. A lot of that is free. I just go into Google Images most of the time, and sometimes I just print it, and sometimes I kind of use it as a jumping off point because I really like that creative stuff. Use your school resources. I use a ton of bulletin board paper. And then the related arts teachers are really, really great about sharing. So I will take them information that I learn about students that I think is helpful, especially like in art. Our students can thrive in art class. And so, like, for example, we have a student that uses a switch to participate. And so I bought, or we got it through a grant, like this doodle maker. And so I took that into the art class and showed it to her with a switch. And I was like, that way, when you're doing your big landscapes or your backgrounds, she can do that. And so I share those materials because when I need construction paper or paintbrushes, or for the gym teacher, when I need scooter boards or cones or hula hoops, they're always very responsive about letting me borrow those things. And then classroom supplies. Students love to use their little pencil boxes, and especially if they're going to move. So if we're going to go from the classroom to therapy room, they love to take their pencil boxes. But if you think about the pencil box, that should be the perfect scenario because that's individualized to them. So if we have given a pencil gripper to a student because their grasp is, not efficient, it should be in that pencil box. If we have suggested that they use adaptive scissors, they should be in that pencil box. All the materials that they need that are differentiated to that student should be in that pencil box. When we think about funding sources, my school district is very wonderful about providing grants through like the PTO or district-wide. But if you don't have that luxury, there are definitely community grants, and our unions are the education unions, they definitely offer grant funding. But I've known people that I knew a person that did a grant through Spectrum Cable and got like $10,000. And so it's definitely the money's out there. We just kind of have to go and get it. Okay, so in addition to all of that, when we're playing this spot group, we got to think about the IEP goals. So we need to, keep it child-centered. And so we're going to do that through the IEP goals. And of course, we're going to keep that grounding in theory. As far as like the OT stuff, that fine motor, sensory motor, all that stuff, that's usually handled through the group activity. And so that might look like some sort of like little activity, like a little craft, or it might be an obstacle course or what have you. The communication, though, that can happen at any point. That can happen through peer interactions, adult interactions, however that's going to play out. We need to plan as much as possible, though. So again, it matters where we're sitting, or where the students are going to sit, who they're going to be sitting with. And then we need to have those switches pre-programmed as much as possible. And then have them in the right position, because it doesn't work if you go in and you pre-program everything and then you put it on the desk. And then when you come in for spot group and you see students way over there and their switches, their voice is way over here. And so again, you get used to it. And that's why transdisciplinary collaboration doesn't happen immediately, because you have to work up to it. Okay, so I thought I would go ahead and give you some clear examples of what that curriculum might look like. So I was, this was with a kindergarten through second grade classroom for students with multiple disabilities. And so we always start out with a book or something like that. It helps establish a theme for the kiddos. It targets self-regulation, because then like we kind of got them, we're kind of going to be quiet a little bit. We're all going to be sitting together, and their sitting might be very flexible in how they're sitting, but we're all going to kind of be in the same area. You can address language through answering questions about the book. I've seen some amazing language with the speech therapists I work with just by reading books. But then we can also address visual spatial skills through reading the book. You know, where is this? What's this? Can you point to this? All those different things. So if you have students that are working on hand-eye coordination or visual spatial or even range of motion, just reaching up and touching is going to be huge. So the theme that I thought we were going to work from today would be like the ABCs. And so there's a book, Alphabet Adventure, if you've ever heard of it, by Audrey Wood. It's a really, really adorable book. And so we would start out just reading the book. And so it's about these letters and they all have to make their way to Charlie's desk and they ride these pencils and it's super, super cute. In addition to reading that book, because we're talking about the ABCs, we might sing the alphabet song. And you know, you have to think about the fact that some of our students' internal rhythm is either way too fast or way too slow. And so by singing a song or clapping or tapping, that's going to give our students that external rhythm to help them regulate their sensory system. So for optimal learning. Another way to tackle that would be through yoga letter poses. And literally I Googled yoga letter poses and Google images and a whole page came up and you could literally pick on one that you think is going to be appropriate. And then, so I wouldn't recommend doing A through Z. You might pick one letter that day, or you might do a CBC word, or you might, if somebody has a really short name or something like that. That's what, you know, how I would tackle that. Another way you could, tackle the ABCs in that setting would be practicing signing letters. They love doing that. They absolutely love just trying to learn those signs. And then when there's a student in the classroom that might be a little bit more proficient at signing, that helps them, you know, their status gets elevated at that moment because then they get to show another student how to do something. And so, of course, it's very fine motor oriented and it's wonderful if you're able to work on that. What I would say to you is be very deliberate in your structure, but flexible in your execution. That's where that differentiation comes in. Okay, so if we were going to do this activity, I would say we were sitting on the carpet, we sang our song, we did our yoga poses, and then we're going to transition over to the table. And so when we go over to the table, I'm going to present them. I made this little pencil. And so I'm going to present them with our activity that we're going to do today. I would already have these probably already cut up for students with a line. Some students might have multiple lines. Some students might just have a space, like a square. And so it's going to be differentiated to each of the students. But the main activity is cutting some simple shapes. We're going to put it together and use our classroom tools, and we're going to write our name on the paper. That's what we're doing. So the ways in which we differentiate that. We might write letters in different media. Some students might not use pencil. Some students might use crayon markers. We might just, you know, put that aside and put some shaving cream on the table and start doing some letters there. However it works, it's going to work. Writing letters with in their name using rainbow writing. So, you know, have them, write their name using those verbal pathways that you're going to give them, and then have them practice that motor plan. Having the pieces already pre-cut. So again, like, you know, these might be pre-cut, but then some students can cut all of their pieces, or we might have some students just cut the lead part or the wood part for students, like students that are just working on straight line cutting. And then students that are just maybe at the snipping page and snipping stage, they can just snip these, and then we use those for the tips of all of our pencils. And so then all of our students are working together to get to this end, but we're still differentiating it to each student. And I will say, as far as grants, one thing to think about is like think about long term. And so one of the best things I ever ordered in a grant was this huge box of different sizes of Ziploc bags. And so when you think about giving the materials, and if you're passing out like pieces and parts like this to students, it's wonderful to put each kid's stuff in their own bag. It's wonderful. And then the last way that I would think about differentiating this activity would be if you had the square and then you had students that were working with name stamps. We have several students in that K through 2 classroom that are working on name stamps. And so being able to help visually prompt them to get their name stamped in that box is going to be a success for them. So it's wonderful. Obviously, this is geared more towards a fine motor group because I am an OT, but that's where that collaboration piece comes in. But I want you to really think about the fact that speech and language can occur across any setting, in any environment. So if we were just doing this activity and we didn't really have anything else planned, the speech therapist would be sitting with a student that we had already planned that she was going to kind of target or sit with a group of students. And she could practice letter sounds as they were working. She can practice and work on having them request materials, prompting them for descriptors of the activity that we're doing, or just encouraging those peer interactions. So many of our students are working on social skill development. So just encouraging that is a huge thing to be able to do, especially in their natural environment. Language is all around us. We need to remember that, and we just need to create the environment that's going to make that optimal. So this is an example of the data that I could collect during that particular group. I do not go into spot group with something like this. It was just something I was trying to figure out how I would address it for the project. But so, for example, I have students' names, and then the arousal level, their grasp patterns, their letters, assistive tech, and positioning. So those might be the areas that we're going to target this day, and not everybody's targeting the same things. And so I would, make a note of what everybody's arousal level, and that's the zones of regulation. I don't know if you guys follow that or not, but that's just a good way to judge, what their arousal level was and then how they performed. So what their grasp patterns look like. Now, I will say that when I am jotting this stuff down, I am not writing out 4-point dynamics, 3-point static. I'm not, you have your own codes and shortcuts and stuff like that when you're jotting down information. And you might I jot that down on, Post-its, scrap papers, on their work sample. A lot of times I just kind of write it off to the side, and then I can get it when I get back to my desk, and I can put it in the documentation. Again, like with my the abbreviations, TBLR, that in my mind, that's top to bottom, left to right. So they're doing proper letter formation 3 out of 6 times or 4 out of 5 times. And then like my one kiddo is working on stamping their name, and they did it that day with visual prompting. Awesome. And then some of our other students are working on positioning. So again, we're not collecting data on every single thing every time. You really have to prioritize. And so now I want to jump to what that next, that 3rd through 5th grade. So it looks a little different because usually the students, they have different goals, first of all, but they just like a different, usually like a little bit different. So if we go with that idea of first day of school, we might address interoception, what it feels like to be anxious and nervous. Many of our students, they'll just say, oh, my stomach hurts. And so we try to get them to learn what it feels like to be anxious, and maybe their stomachs hurt because they're anxious. Their stomach hurts because of X, Y, and Z. And then you can go right into the zones of regulation, and what color is that? And then how do we move from one zone to the other? You can practice deep breathing. You can practice any of these techniques that might move you from yellow to green or blue to green or what have you. An activity that I thought about would be an All About Me page. Again, you can just Google that and you can pull off something, you can create something, but it's very simple. But you can have them fill it out themselves. You can have them interview a partner and then introduce each other. And then I would keep track of those similarities within the group. The ways to differentiate that would be that you want to have switches pre-programmed with the questions. You can have worksheets that are already, so you have the All About Me page. Some of them might just be check marks, and then some of them might have spaces to write. You could always allow keyboarding versus writing too. You could use the Snap Type app, and that helps, bring in the PDF and they can type right into it. This would be an example of the data that I could collect. Again, I'm not bringing in this chart and trying to keep track of it like that. I'm just trying to show you the data that I could collect on that particular day. So for example, Tommy and Tiffany are not working on keyboarding. So I have an example of their writing, the data from their writing. Timmy and Tammy are working on keyboarding, so we have information there. And then how did Tammy do? Well, she used an on-screen keyboard with the touch screen. So what that looks like. And then how did Tiffany do? Well, she used the standing desk today. Awesome. That means, she stayed in her area, but she was standing, and that's absolutely fine. That's definitely a possibility. I think that it's really good to remember that with this age group, you almost always have a work sample. And so that makes it a little bit easier to capture that data. You can still, keep track on your Post-its or however you prefer to collect data, but it's definitely possible in this group setting. You may need to think about what the technology looks like in your school district. I know that in my school district, we're blessed with that one-to-one correspondence for Chromebooks, but some school districts are not, probably a lot of school districts. And so, what do you have access to? Do you have access to iPads? Do you have access to, desktop computers? Anything like that. If you only have enough for half, then maybe half the class does it half the time, and then the other half will do it the next time. Or you can pair them up. And again, that's another social language opportunity. And then they can ask the questions of each other and input the information together. Another thing that I would just throw out to you is this age group loves science experiments for some reason, in my opinion, in my experience. But there's so much you can get out of doing a science experiment through a spot group. You can get writing and typing hypotheses, making predictions, writing and typing observations. You can bring in the graphs. You can let them be creative. Our students in that classroom, no matter what, or the last 10 years, it doesn't matter. They love that to be creative. I would also say, like I said earlier, to capture the similarities, I wouldn't be afraid to bring in movement. And so when you get to that point where you're talking about graphs and so you could say like, whoever like the color, whoever's favorite color is blue, do jumping jacks. And so they might jump up and do 5 jumping jacks. Or if your favorite color was red, I want you to tap your head. And when you do that, you're helping them make that connection. And you're helping them realize that they're not alone and that they have somebody else in the classroom that is similar to them. The science experiments are almost always fine motor and sensory motor rich, but language rich. There's so much in there to target that age group. And then I also wanted to bring in another example of that post-secondary group. We need to be respectful of the fact that they're guys, they're adults. And so we do need to think about things a little bit different. So one of the activities that I thought would be fun to do, and I have done this with that group of students, is we do target more functional skills. So you look at vocational skills, you look at social skills training, and kind of like the independent living. So the theme this particular week was introductions and discussing the importance of introductions and how they differ on your level of familiarity and what to do and what not to do, and then practice by role playing. And my students that I was working with this past year, they loved the role playing. And we did it like kind of like charades, where they would have to pull out a scenario. They would go into another room. They would kind of confer with one another. And then they come in and they would present, introducing yourself to a potential partner or employer, and then how not to introduce yourself. And so then the audience then responds to how could you do it differently? How could that be better? How could, what should you have changed? That kind of thing. And I will say that for the post-secondary students in my district, that none of those students were on caseload. That was all support for school personnel. So I would jot things down, but I didn't have to keep that strict data as far as percentages and things like that. So why should we aim for that spot group, that transdisciplinary approach? It's the most meaningful and the most impactful to students and the therapists involved. It's a beautiful thing when you are involved in it. It's like your energy increases and it matches your partner, and it just it's just invigorating. It's wonderful. But in order to get there, you got to have that role release where, when somebody walks into that classroom or the environment that you're in and you're leading a transdisciplinary spot group, that person's not going to know who the speech therapist is and who's the OT and who's the teacher and who's whomever. That role release just allows you to be freer to do what needs to be done. You're still looking at things through your OT eyes. You're still looking from that perspective. You're still collecting data from that perspective, but you are blending those boundaries. I think that by doing the transdisciplinary spot group in the classroom, the staff gets to see the level of support we provide and what that actually looks like. When I say, that I just, maybe I position him this way and I just barely have to touch him and then he doesn't. Well, they don't know what that means. Like that's not a very good descriptor. It's probably not a great example. But if I'm in the classroom and I'm doing it with the student, they're able to see firsthand what that looks like and the words I use and things like that. If, again, if we're doing it in the classroom, then it's another opportunity for that student to make the connection of like, oh, I'm supposed to do what I do in that individual session here in the classroom, and help them generalize that skill. Make those connections is sometimes really difficult for students. So our projected outcomes, we definitely, if we are able to get to this point of doing transdisciplinary spot groups, we are developing more cohesive and collaborative relationships with students. We have additional opportunities for skill development for our students and data collection. The generalization with support is that much more heightened, and we have more opportunities for observation in the natural setting. How many students do we get in a one-on-one or one-on-two session, and their behavior is beautiful, and then in the classroom they fall apart because of all the sensory overload that they're experiencing? So it's nice to be able to see in that natural setting. And then there is a little bit more of a therapeutic investment. When you have a partner that you can plan and write grants and really invest, it's hard to walk away from that. There is so much more of an investment because that relationship is so much more strengthened. In the end, we want to use that transdisciplinary approach to collaboration because it's just simply best practice. It's what's best for students. So what I want you to take away from today is I want you to know that spot group is meant to be fun. If it's not fun, something needs to be changed. And honestly, there have been times where I work with partners and it's like, oh, that did not go well. We're going to have to change it up. Every collaboration is not going to be transdisciplinary, but that's what we need to strive for. It does take time. It takes flexibility. It takes trust in yourself and in your partner. And then when you achieve that transdisciplinary and transdisciplinarity, again, the observer that comes in should not know who the OT is and who's the speech therapist and vice versa. It should just be everybody's working together for the common goal. Again, if I can reiterate, be deliberate in your structure and flexible in your execution. And you can do this. It is definitely worth the effort. I did, there are 2 surveys that I would love if you could fill out. There's one about your learning experience today, and then one about me as a presenter. And then I did just reiterate that if you do have more questions, you can put those into the chat option. I think that we're going to have to put these links into the chat. I'm not sure how we're going to get that to you guys, but. And then there is quite an exhaustive list of references, so I hope that is helpful. That's all I got. I can't hear you. I think you're muted.
I always forget that. Oh, thank you so much, DeeAnna. This was just so overwhelmingly good. So much good information. I am just delighted with it. We do have a question wondering if we can get a copy of your slides because there was so much information in that. Would you be willing to share that with us, maybe a PDF or something like that?
I can certainly figure that out.
If you can do that, if you will send that to me, I can be sure to get it to the group. And I think if we have any questions, I'm seeing some appreciation in here. You can put your question in the chat, or you can, feel free to unmute and just share your question with us and turn on your camera. I think this was just outstanding. If you read the bio that I sent out about DeeAnna, then you will know that she is working on her PhD. This was her capstone presentation. And so the next time we see her, she'll have doctor in front of her name. And I'm just delighted about that. I think that is so fantastic to see related service providers pursuing higher education. And certainly with this kind of research, it's just wonderful to see the research. I thought she gave us some great ideas for data collection too. I get a lot of questions about that. I love the idea that you gave about the work samples and the sticky notes. I'm also delighted that you brought up the billing concerns. Yes, we're all dealing with Medicaid and, the billing concerns. Thank you so much for reaching out to Mark Smith and getting an answer on that for us. So thank you for that. And I also thought it was kind of interesting that 15% of our schools, at least in your survey, are, allowing a time. I thought that was kind of interesting. That's certainly something to keep in mind. I love the pencil box idea. Also the researching grants, I would go along with that. When I was working in the schools, I had a supervisor she was always looking for grants and usually wanting me to co-write them with her. But, and sometimes, we were successful. I mean, we did get money that way. So it really is something to keep in mind, especially if you're in a school district that, resources are limited, think about researching those grants. So the role release idea, wow, that is so important. Love that. Okay. Do we have any questions? Lots of appreciation here. Do we have any questions or maybe comments? Did someone get some ideas maybe of some things that you may do when you are back working in the schools again? And I think I love the quote about child's, what was it? Maybe you can say, I tried to write it down, but I'm not reading my own writing. The child's